Good morning. Welcome to today's story, a touching, humane, and educational tale.
The old library bus was already halfway to the scrapyard when Lena Brooks heard a child's voice whisper from a dusty cassette player, "If the siren doesn't sound, don't take the East Bridge." This story will show you how honesty can cost a person everything at first, why the smallest voices still deserve to be heard, and how what a town throws away can become the very thing that saves it. By the time Lena came back to Briar Glen, Pennsylvania, she owned exactly three things that still felt like hers: a faded blue suitcase, a cardboard box full of school papers she could not bear to throw away, and a shame so heavy it made her shoulders hurt. She was 19 years old, too young to feel this tired, and yet tired all the same. The bus from Pittsburgh dropped her off across from Miller's Gas and Grocery just after noon. The sky hung low and gray over town, the kind of late fall sky western Pennsylvania wore so often it felt permanent. The hills around Briar Glen were brown and bare. The old paper mill at the edge of town still sat empty, its broken windows staring out like blind eyes. A cold wind carried the smell of wet leaves, gasoline, and chimney smoke. Lena stood on the curb in her thrift store coat and looked at the place she had once promised herself she would outgrow. She had left Briar Glen with a scholarship, a hopeful heart, and the stubborn belief that hard work made life fair. Then she had taken a job at a private elementary academy in the city, tutoring reading and writing, staying late for children who mixed up their vowels and hid their report cards in their backpacks. She loved the classroom. She loved the smell of dry erase marker, fresh paper, and sharpened pencils. She loved watching a child realize a sentence finally made sense. Then she found out certain students' grades were being changed, quietly, deliberately, because their parents donated enough money to keep the school smiling. Lena reported it. 2 weeks later, she was let go for professionalism concerns. No lawsuit, no apology, no one standing beside her. Just a final paycheck, a cold meeting, and the humiliating understanding that telling the truth did not always make people grateful. Her Aunt May had offered her the spare room above the garage for as long as needed. In Briar Glen, that meant love. It also meant everyone in town would know by supper that Lena Brooks had come home broke. She had barely set down her suitcase before Aunt May handed her a mug of weak coffee and said, "If you want to keep your mind busy, they're cleaning out that old library bus tomorrow. Town council finally sold it." "The book bus?" Lena asked. Aunt May nodded. "Shame, too. Used to bring books clear out to the trailer roads and creek houses. Nobody reads off shelves anymore, I guess." The next morning, Lena walked down to the municipal lot behind the shuttered library, and there it was. The old bus looked tired in a way that felt almost human. Its paint, once cheerful cream and navy, had peeled and blistered. One headlight was cracked, rust feathered along the wheel wells. The sign over the windshield still read, "Briar Glen Mobile Library," though half the letters had faded into ghosts. A man from the scrap company was smoking by the fence. "Anything worth saving, save it now," he said. "Truck comes at noon." Inside, the bus smelled like old paper, rain, and dust baked into metal. Empty shelves lined the walls. A few forgotten picture books lay scattered on the floor. A paper moon, yellowed with age, still hung crooked from the ceiling above the reading corner. Lena ran her hand over a shelf and came away with gray dust on her fingers. For the first time in weeks, something inside her softened. This place had once mattered. She moved slowly, gathering damaged books into boxes, stacking old binders, sorting what could still be used from what was too far gone. Near the driver's seat, she found a milk crate full of cassette tapes labeled in black marker. Summer Reading Club, 2003, Kids Story Hour, Flood Memory Project. Lena frowned. She found a battered tape player under a seat, wiped it off with her sleeve, and pressed one of the tapes in. Static crackled. Then came the sound of a child taking a nervous breath. And a small voice said, clear as church bells in cold air, "If the siren doesn't sound, don't take the East Bridge." Lena froze. Outside, the scrap man shouted something she didn't catch. But inside that bus, with the weak November lights slanting through the dirty windows, Lena suddenly had the strangest feeling. Like she had not come home to disappear. Like something in Briar Glen had been waiting for her to listen. Lena did not touch the stop button right away. She stood there in the aisle of the old bus, one hand still resting on the dusty shelf, while that child's voice echoed through the weak little speaker. Then came a second voice, a girl this time, younger, careful, almost like she was reading from a note card. My mom said the water came so fast nobody had time to get the dog chain loose. She said people kept waiting for the siren because that's what they were told to do. The tape hissed. A chair leg scraped somewhere outside. Lena felt a cold ripple move down her arms. This was not a story hour recording. This was something else. She stopped the tape, ejected it, and looked down at the label again. Flood Memory Project. By noon, the scrap truck had come and gone without the bus. Lena had used the only steady thing she still had, her teacher voice, to ask for one more day. The driver had shrugged and said the town could argue with him later. Until then, the bus stayed where it was. That afternoon, with the cassette tapes tucked inside her coat pocket, Lena walked 3 blocks uphill to a narrow brick house with blue shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. A brass plaque by the front step read, "Evelyn Hart, County Literacy Volunteer, retired." Aunt May had said if anybody knew the story of that bus, it would be Miss Evelyn. Lena knocked. After a moment, the door opened, and a woman in a cranberry cardigan and reading glasses looked her over with calm, assessing eyes. "You're June Brooks' girl," she said. "Granddaughter," Lena corrected gently. "I'm Lena." Evelyn nodded once as if she had expected that answer. "Come in before the cold decides to move in with us." The house smelled like cinnamon tea, old books, and lemonwood polish. Every table held stacks of novels, church cookbooks, and library sale paperbacks with curled corners. It felt like the kind of place where nothing important had ever been thrown away. Lena sat at the kitchen table and placed the cassette tapes between them. "I found these in the book bus," she said. "One of them has kids talking about the flood, about a siren, about the East Bridge." For the first time, Evelyn's expression changed. Not surprise. Pain. She sat down slowly across from Lena and folded her hands over one another. "I wondered if those tapes were still around," she said quietly. "What are they?" Lena asked. Evelyn looked toward the window, where bare branches scratched softly against the glass. 21 years ago, after the flood, I started a project with the children. Reading, writing, talking, just trying to help them put words around what they'd seen. Back then, folks in Briar Glen liked to say we were blessed it wasn't worse. She paused. That usually means it was worse than they want to admit. Lena listened without interrupting. That flood hit the trailer roads and the east side hardest. The poorer side. The side people talked about only when they needed votes at election time. Evelyn gave a small, bitter smile. Children heard everything adults said. More importantly, they heard what adults refused to say. Lena touched the edge of one tape. "So the recordings matter." "Oh, honey," Evelyn said, her voice softening. "The right voices always matter. Towns just get very skilled at pretending otherwise." She stood, crossed the kitchen, and opened a drawer near the old refrigerator. From inside, she pulled out a slim binder filled with handwritten lesson plans, attendance sheets, and yellowing consent forms. Across the front, in neat marker, were the words, "Mobile Library Outreach, Flood Recovery Unit." "You ran the bus?" Lena asked. "For 12 years, Evelyn said. Out to farms, hollows, creek roads, trailer courts. Anywhere children were too far from books and grown folks were too tired to drive them." Lena felt something tight and aching rise in her chest. A bus full of books. Children trying to tell the truth. A whole town deciding it had no use for either one. "Miss Evelyn," she said, "I think there's something in those tapes people still need to hear." Evelyn studied her for a long moment. Maybe she saw the exhaustion in Lena's face. Maybe she saw the humiliation she had brought home from the city. Or maybe she simply recognized the look of someone standing at the edge of something bigger than herself. Finally, Evelyn reached for the cassette player Lena had brought in her tote bag. "Then let's not guess," she said. "Let's listen." And as the tape began to turn again, Lena had the strange, steady feeling that the bus had not followed her home by accident. It had found the one person in town still willing to sit down and hear what had been buried. By the third evening, Lena had listened to enough of the tapes to stop hearing them as recordings. They felt alive. Not polished, not dramatic, just real. A boy talking about how his father tied ropes between fence posts so the neighbors could cross the water without getting swept away. A little girl whispering that she still slept in her rain boots because she was afraid the floor might turn cold and wet again in the night. Another child, voice trembling, saying the siren never came when it should have. And by the time folks realized the creek had jumped its banks, the east side was already trapped. Lena sat at Evelyn Hart's kitchen table with a pencil in her hand and a yellow legal pad full of notes. Beside her, the old tape player clicked and hummed, Outside, evening settled over Briar Glen in layers of blue-gray shadow, and the wind pressed dry leaves against the porch screen. Evelyn poured more tea and said, "The hard part isn't getting people to hear the truth. The hard part is getting them to stop calling it old news." Lena nodded, but her thoughts were already moving. She had spent so much of the past few months feeling shut out, shoved aside, talked over. At the school in the city, the people with money had decided which truth counted and which truth got buried. Here in Briar Glen, it felt smaller, quieter, but not all that different. She looked up from her notes. What if the tapes don't stay in a kitchen drawer this time? Evelyn studied her over the rim of her mug. What do you have in mind? Lena glanced towards the window, where the outline of the old library bus sat under the street lamp in the municipal lot down the hill. The bus, she said, not as junk, as something useful again. The next morning, Lena found Noah Reed under the hood of a battered Chevy pickup behind his repair garage. Noah had been 2 grades ahead of her in school. He was 32 now, broad-shouldered, quiet, with grease on his hands and the kind of steady face that made a person feel less frantic just looking at him. He also volunteered with the fire department, which in Briar Glen meant half the town trusted him and the other half owed him a favor. He listened while Lena explained the tapes, the bus, and the idea forming in her mind. "You want to get that old thing running?" he asked. "Not far," Lena said. "Just enough to make it safe. Lights, maybe heat, maybe the sound system. If there's any life left in it." Noah wiped his hands on a shop rag. "That bus hasn't moved in years." "I know. The town sold it for scrap." "I know that too." He looked at her a second longer, then at the paper in her hand where she had written out a list of what the bus might need. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. "You always did come prepared." Lena gave the smallest smile back. "That a yes?" "It's a maybe," he said. "Bring me the keys." By that afternoon, word had spread enough to attract a skinny boy on a bicycle who circled the bus twice before stopping cold. "Miss Brooks?" Lena turned. It was Mateo Ruiz, 14 years old, all elbows and earnest eyes, with a backpack hanging open and a pair of giant headphones around his neck. She remembered him from town, the kind of kid adults called quiet when what they meant was overlooked. "I heard you found old tapes," he said. Lena nodded. "You interested?" Mateo pushed his glasses up. "I do audio stuff, not professional or anything. Just at home, cleaning noise, copying old files. My abuelo had church cassettes and I fixed some." Lena blinked. "You know how to digitize them?" His face changed right there in front of her. Not bigger, brighter. "Yes, ma'am," he said. By Friday, the old bus had a work table, an extension cord running from Noah's garage, and a kind of fragile purpose settling into its bones. Mateo worked carefully over the tapes with a borrowed converter and a pair of headphones that looked too large for his head. Evelyn sorted books in milk crates. Lena wiped down shelves, swept years of dust from the floor, and tacked up a handwritten sign in the front window. Briar Glen Book Bus, open Saturday. At first, only a few people came. A retired coalman looking for westerns, a mother with 2 little girls who wanted picture books. An older woman who stepped onto the bus heard one of the recordings playing softly through Mateo's speakers and sat down so suddenly Lena thought she might faint. "That's my brother," the woman whispered. "He was 9 when he made that." She put her hand over her mouth and listened like someone hearing a ghost come home. And one by one, that was how it began. Not with applause, not with headlines, but with people stepping into a bus they thought was finished, hearing voices they had not let themselves remember, and standing very still in the truth of what had been lost. By sunset, Lena leaned against the bus door and looked out at the lot. The place felt different now, smaller somehow, and more alive, like a light had come on in a room nobody realized had gone dark years ago. By Monday, the rain had changed its mind about leaving. It started as a cold, steady drizzle over Briar Glen, the kind folks in western Pennsylvania barely noticed at first. Then the creek turned the color of coffee, the ditches filled, the wind picked up, and by late afternoon the sky had gone from gray to the kind of deep, bruised color that made older people step onto their porches and stare at the hills in silence. Lena was inside the book bus, sorting a box of donated paperbacks, when Noah came up the steps, 2 at a time. "We've got a problem," he said. That was all it took. She looked up and saw it in his face right away. Noah Reed was not a man who wasted fear. "The fire station just got an update from County Emergency Management," he said. "They're saying the storm cells stalled over the ridge. If the upper runoff keeps coming down like this, Miller Creek could jump fast." Lena set the box aside. How fast? Fast enough. Mateo pulled off one earphone from the little sound station he had set up in the back. Evelyn, who had been shelving children's books near the window, turned slowly. Nobody spoke for a second. Then Lena asked the question already pressing on all of them. The siren system still works, right? Noah's silence answered first. Then he said, supposed to. That word landed hard. Supposed to. By 6 o'clock, Main Street was slick with rain and emergency chatter. Pickup trucks rolled past with headlights on. Folks started calling relatives on the east side of town. Church basements were being unlocked. Sandbags came out of garages that smelled like old paint and wet concrete. And then Mayor Glenn Barlow showed up. He stepped out of his SUV in a waxed jacket and polished boots that had clearly never met real mud. 2 councilmen came with him, along with Sheriff Dana Cole, her jaw tight and unreadable beneath the brim of her hat. Barlow climbed the bus steps and looked around like the place offended him personally. This ends tonight, he said. This vehicle was condemned for salvage, Miss Brooks. You had no authority to reopen it as a public space. And I'm not having panic spread through town because of old stories and bad weather. Lena stood her ground near the driver's seat. People aren't panicking, she said. They're preparing. You've been stirring up fear with those tapes. No, Lena said, her voice low and steady. Those children were trying to warn people. There's a difference. Barlow's expression hardened. The county has systems in place. At that, Mateo glanced up from the laptop. Then why is the East Bank gauge reading higher than what they announced? The mayor snapped his head toward him. Excuse me? Mateo swallowed hard but kept going. I pulled the public data feed. It's been climbing for an hour. Noah stepped forward then, broad and calm and impossible to ignore. He's right. Outside, thunder rolled low across the hills. Sheriff Dana Cole looked from one face to another. Water dripped from the brim of her hat onto the bus floor. Mayor, she said, maybe we ought to wait before we tow anything. Barlow turned on her. Wait for what? A rumor? And right then, as if the whole town had been holding its breath for the answer, the lights on Main Street flickered once, twice, then went out. The bus went dark except for Mateo's battery lamp and the pale wash of storm light through the windows. A heartbeat later, every person on board listened for the one sound that was supposed to follow. The warning siren. Nothing. No rising wail. No signal from the water tower. No town-wide cry telling people to move. Just rain pounding a roof harder than before. Evelyn closed her eyes for one brief second, like she had heard this silence in a different year and never truly forgotten it. Lena felt something cold move straight through her. The tape, the child's voice. If the siren doesn't sound, don't take the East Bridge. She turned toward Noah. How much time do we have? He looked toward the black windows and answered honestly, not enough if people wait. Barlow cursed under his breath and reached for his phone, but there was no signal now, only a dead screen and rising water. Lena stepped forward, every nerve in her body awake. Then we don't wait, she said. Sheriff Cole stared at her. Outside, somewhere down the hill, somebody shouted over the storm, and deep in the dark belly of Briar Glen, the creek kept rising. For one long second, nobody moved. Then Lena did. Mateo, she said, her voice firm and clear, can you run the bus speakers off battery? His hands shook, but only for a moment. Then that bright, focused look came over his face again. Yes, ma'am, for a while. Noah, I need every route that stays high ground. I know them, he said. Sheriff Cole, Lena said, turning to Dana. If the siren failed, then this bus becomes the warning. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like gravel. Dana looked at Mayor Barlow, then at the dark street outside, then back at Lena. And in that moment, something shifted. Not political, not official, human. She took off her hat, wiped the rain from her brow, and said, do it. The next hour moved like a blur. Noah drove the old library bus through sheets of rain and standing water, the engine groaning, the wipers fighting for their lives. Mateo sat near the front with the microphone, his voice trembling at first, then growing steadier with every block. This is an emergency warning. Do not take the East Bridge. Move to high ground. Church basement on Walnut. Fire station on Main. Repeat, do not take the East Bridge. Again and again, the message rolled out through the storm. Evelyn called out names and roads from memory. Turn here. The Coopers still live down that bend. Mrs. Yates can't walk fast. Check the trailer row. Don't forget the little white house with the blue porch. Lena moved through the aisle, pounding on the bus walls when Noah needed to stop, jumping out into the rain with Dana to bang on doors, help children into the bus, guide older folks through the mud, and point headlights toward the narrow back roads the old tapes had mentioned. The roads newer maps ignored. The roads children had remembered. By the time the East Bridge gave way sometime after midnight, most of the families on that side were already out. Cold, shaken, soaking wet, but alive. Morning came gray and silent. The creek had swallowed fences, porches, and part of the lower road. Mud lay thick over the east side like the town had been dropped and bruised in the dark. But the church basement was full. The fire hall was full. The high school gym was full of blankets, casseroles, crying children, and stunned gratitude. And the old library bus sat in the parking lot under a washed-out sky, muddy and dented and more beautiful than it had any right to be. In the days that followed, the truth came out in pieces. The siren system had not been properly serviced in years. Funds had been redirected. Reports had been softened. Mayor Barlow stopped giving interviews. But Briar Glen was no longer listening to polished speeches. It was listening to each other. Weeks later, Lena stood beside the bus as children climbed aboard for story hour again. Real story hour this time. Picture books, cocoa in paper cups, clean shelves, warm lights. Mateo now ran the audio station like he had been born for it. Noah had fixed the heater. Evelyn sat in the reading chair near the back, smiling in that quiet way of hers, like she had always known the town might yet remember how to be decent. Lena looked around and realized something gentle and healing, and almost holy. She had come home believing her life had fallen apart. Instead, she had found the place where it finally began. The bus nobody wanted had become the heart of Briar Glen again. And the girl who had been punished for telling the truth had become the reason a town survived long enough to face it. So let me ask you something. If the world called something broken, old, or useless, would you throw it away? Or would you stop long enough to listen for what it still might save? If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you most. And if you believe stories about courage, truth, and second chances still matter, please subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one.